Good afternoon from East Coast in America, and good evening to those of us who are in Istanbul, Turkey, or in Europe in general, and all around the world. My name is Didem Altop, and I will be your host for today's session of the Turkish Philanthropy Fund, Voices of Partners. We are really excited to be hosting the Maya Vakfı Foundation and their fabulous work in a trauma-informed world for children, their programs there. And today we have with us, of course, the founder and the president of Maya Vakfı Foundation, Esra Özsüer, the clinical programs coordinator, Gizem Konuş, and the clinical programs officer, Ayşe Sinem Bos, who Gizem and Sinem are now in Urfa. Esra is in Istanbul, I'm in Fort Lauderdale, and the Turkish Philanthropy Fund team is in New York. So it's really a worldwide connected session that we have. You know, today we're going to be talking about some really sensitive topics and in a very optimistic way, right? So it's really taking some heavy issues, but really putting the solution set in front of us. We're going to be talking about this wonderful topic. It's really important. And I learned a lot actually when we had our briefing sessions about a trauma-informed world for children. It was really interesting to me because what I thought was trauma is actually much, much broader. And obviously there's explicit trauma, and then there's long-term emotional trauma that almost applies to everyone in the world. And we'll be understanding what psychosocial support services mean. And, you know, we have two really fantastic case studies today, actually. The Maya Vakfı Foundation is working in the Balat Child Protection Program, but they're also involved in disaster response programs. So they're going to give us some really clear examples of the work that they're doing. And before we deep dive into those programs and the case studies, I would really like to start with Esra, if that's okay. And then we'd like to talk a little bit about, you know, Maya Vakfı Foundation's inception. Like, how did it get started? What's your mission and what's your big picture theory of change? Esra?
Well, Didem, thank you for this opportunity, first of all. Thank you, TPF, for the grand generosity. And hello, everyone. My name is Esra, and I'm the founder president of Maya Vakfı. But everything started with a project. Everything started with a journey of me and my son, with a project that was giving art support, art therapies, for actually the traumatized and marginalized populations, children, and it was our trauma actually reflecting upon all the children who had trauma. And it was exactly the time of a reflux of refugees in 2012, 2013. And those were the specific needs, and it was giving the response to their trauma. So that's how our project and our response started. And year 2015, as a family, we founded Maya Vakfı Foundation, and with an art therapy-based CPR program, which is a psychological recovery program, which supports art therapy as well within. And so if you ask me, what is really trauma and what are you trying to do? It was, the response is, well, trauma is not an illness. Trauma is something that is a response to a deeply distressing event that causes the traumatic emotional feeling that one individual carries. And this may be caused in the children specifically through a war, through let's say a disaster, or sometimes types of bullying might cause this. Pandemic today might cause for everyone, specifically children. And this is what Maya Vakfı is really focused with an expert team of psychotherapists. This is our main cause. Our main cause is really, we started to heal. And then we saw that, well, heal in the field is a response, but what are we missing is the prevention. So we started making prevention programs. So it was heal, prevention. And the theory of change here is heal, prevention, and evolve. So it's like the Enso circle, you know, we should really transform the world, transform the change of the world by never stop creating. This is where we stand with Theory of Change in Maya.
That's wonderful. And, you know, I forgot to mention actually when I was making introductions that, you know, after all of your years of experience in family business and leading in the business sector, you also are a very active philanthropist and you have a lifelong advocacy of child protection services, but also art, contemporary art. So you've really brought those two things together, which is fascinating, I think.
Thank you.
And the other thing that was really fascinating to me is when you were talking also about the healing, the prevention and the evolution is, you know, you're not just dealing with beneficiaries, you're dealing with the whole ecosystem. So you have the beneficiaries, the NGOs and the capacity building that you're doing for them, the government and the dialogue that you're helping to create there. So it's really this like, you know, trifecta of communities that you're serving and addressing, and it's quite fascinating.
Yes, so coming to what you just mentioned, it's a very important, of course, my colleagues are going to explain it in a more in-depth about the psychotherapeutical methodologies, but our methodology is a holistic methodology, so we really center the child in the middle and then we create the ecosystem around the child. And if we take the daily activity of the child, the activity of the child is in schools. So we thought that if we enter the education system of the child and we put the center, and then we have the counselors, we have the teachers, we have the director, we have even the security and the cleaning and all the ecosystem, whoever is involved in the child's life in school system, we can trauma inform the school. So. Right. So our methodology just evolved from there, and then we have a new way of approach, which is called trauma-informed school program. And then that trauma school informed program progress into the households, because we also approach with child protection program the households. So this, which happens to also go to the community, so you involve the whole community. What happens is actually, it is an incredible, for us, it's a sustainable holistic development program. You cannot say, okay, we're just dealing with healing for an individual, for a child, or just for the parent. It is a huge community development, and that community develops into the whole country. It says really, as you say, you have the civil society, you have the government employees, you have the NGOs, other NGOs, you have the schools involved, you have the children, you have the parents. I mean, it's a chain. And then we have like TPF foundations, organizations, which are, like we said yesterday, orchestrating and giving us actually the seeds so that we can grow out more. And this is very, very important. Yes, wonderful. Exactly. Thank you.
So you're welcome. No, it's wonderful. And you just set the stage perfectly for talking about, you know, the methodology for a trauma-informed world for children programs. And you have two explicit programs, but one is the Balat Child Protection Program and the other is a disaster response. And I would really like to explore those. And to me yesterday, one of the quotes I took from our briefing yesterday was, "A world where a child feels seen and heard." I thought that was fascinating. I also thought that the notion of healing was fascinating. So when you have trauma, any kind of trauma, it probably never goes away, but there's a way that you can articulate it, there's a way you can accept it, and there's a way you can learn to manage it. And I think when you're talking about healing, you're talking about those three kind of phases. So it is a process, it doesn't happen overnight. But maybe we could talk with Gizem and Sinem a little bit about both Balat and the disaster recovery program, and you can give us examples of the methodology for the trauma-informed world.
And then firstly, maybe I can tell about firstly what is trauma and trauma-informed side, and as you said, not being seen and not being heard side.
Yeah.
And first of all, thank you for this contribution. I'm really feel grateful to be here with you. I'm Gizem Konuş, and I'm supervising and coordinating all MHPSS, mental health and psychosocial process at Maya Vakfı Foundation, and trying to use my expertise in social and clinical psychology sites, both in community-based and both in individual-based.
And I'm going to say it's pretty deep.
Yes.
Your experience is pretty deep, more than 15, 20 years of community building around these topics. It's pretty impressive.
Yes, why I put a focus on this, because, you know, even if it's seen that there are individual sessions in our programs, it's really a holistic way of community-based program intervention. But for the beginning, yes, at the beginning our session, you said that it's a heavy topic. Yes, trauma is a very heavy topic, but we are trying to construct an optimistic and constructive way of with dealing with it. I'm not saying now for healing it, but dealing with, because sometimes, as you said, trauma stands in front of us, not as a symptom, not as a pathology, but in a more implicit way. And how? And, you know, when it comes to trauma, it's usually considered as very major life events, such as violence, harassment, natural disaster, loss of a loved one, or death. Yes, that's true, but trauma is not limited to this. Most of the time, traumatic signs stand in front of us in a more implicit way. For instance, sometimes a very introverted child or a very extroverted child, and sometimes a very aggressive, depressed, anxious, or sometimes a very talkative child may have something more crucial. I should pay attention. And as you said, not being seen and not being heard as a child is also a trauma. And that's the point where converts trauma to trauma-informed.
Right.
And also, traumatic experience, besides these major life events, can arise from a variety of scenarios. For example, bullying at school, even the day-to-day exposure to events such as divorce, violence at home, or any kind of bullying in social environments. And all these experiences may have a profound effect on children that we should be on alert. So what is the meaning of trauma-informed with this explanation? Trauma-informed means being alert on these signs. It means being capable of recognizing the implicit signs of a traumatic experience. It means being aware of the steps to take for a child who has a traumatic experience. And it means knowing and having all external and internal resources to deal with adverse life experience which result in trauma. And also it means, trauma-informed means, when you read the signs of trauma, being responsive and addressing the child or the family to the right functional interventions. And as you see, actually it's rather proactive and preventive approach for more severe mental problems or well-being distortions. And having the right tools to manage such kind of traumatic experience empowers all members of schools, all stakeholders of school climate, and all members of community more widely. And the last part of Esra's speech, you said that this is an ecosystem, and in this ecosystem, each stakeholder is really crucial, which we have to touch to a holistic healing or a holistic well-being. And so the goal is not only provide the tools to cope with some extreme situations, but to create an underlying culture of collaboration, respect, and support about trauma.
Fantastic. That's an ambitious goal, but it's also, again, a very optimistic one, because there are tools actually to help people manage their traumas in the long term, which actually, if they go unmanaged, has long-term repercussions on everything from social relationships to economics to health to everything, actually. So being able to tackle that early and giving people those survival skills for managing their traumas is very, very critical.
I think
maybe
I
I
might
can.
add, yeah, I'm sorry, Gizem. I
Sorry,
might
last
add.
point. Maybe I can add our vision and aim at that point. Yani even if an adverse event doesn't result in really clinical pathological symptoms of trauma, it can still have a profoundly negative impact on all areas of a child's development, physically, cognitively, behaviorally, socially, or emotionally. A trauma-informed environment, any kind of trauma-informed environment, accounts for this potential, this harmful potential, and includes supportive elements for prevention and early intervention. And as Maya Vakfı Foundation, our vision, our goal is to provide appropriate training for all stakeholders, school management, communities, and organizations, so that they become trauma-informed and mentally healthy places for all. This means we aim to help children and teenagers before they get mental health problems, to catch them as they are falling, not after they have fallen, maybe I can say.
Esra, you wanted to add something to that?
Actually, I do, yes, because it's very important that we're talking about trauma. We're talking about trauma-informed, the conceptual way of putting trauma into actually action. But we also have to say that this is not utopia, all right? This is being measured. So this is the importance of our work. The outcome is measured. So if you do a work which is measurable, if the outcome can be measured, it gives access to a validation. A valid work can be scalable, a valid work can be culturally adaptable, a valid work can be applied to many other areas in the world or problematic marginalized communities and cultures. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because really big change can be created. And we're not just talking about, just facts. We're talking about really measurable outcomes. And these outcomes can really be associated with the future change. This really excites me. It is very tangible. It is very like, hold on, wait a minute, let's see what we can do next. And this is what I wanted to add.
Yeah. Well, with all of your experience, I mean, since 2014, 2015, you've really honed your skills, I believe, and you've become a global expert on the activities that you're doing, both through the Balat Child Protection Program and through your most recent disaster response program in Muğla, for example.
I think Ayşe Sinem is the person who is mostly in the field. She likes she's an expert on the application and field worker. She can give some examples on how we have responded actually to a disaster, for example, and how we have been on the field work, and when let's say responding to a relief that was in emergency, and we call it a crisis emergency. We don't call it something else, we call it that. And maybe Ayşe Sinem can give us some insight from that.
Exactly. Sure. And it would be really interesting to talk about how art plays a role in that whole articulation, in that whole spectrum, the process of healing and dealing, let's call it, articulation, acceptance, and management. It would be really interesting to understand that better.
Yeah. As you might from the definition of trauma-informed approach, as Maya Vakfı, we are a very responsive approach to traumatic events, and disaster program has begun with the Elazığ earthquake in 2020. Then we implement this program in Izmir earthquake in 2022. And when we come to 2022, Muğla wildfire incidents happened, and this time disaster was all about nature. So we add our implementation method, ecotherapy methods. So this was the nature has created the disasters. So because of the climate change and the climate crisis, so we add ecotherapy methods to our implementation methods, intervention methods, and nature. The ecotherapy based on the idea that nature has itself healing effect for people, because we are not separated from the nature, because we are the part of the nature. So as the nature, we have power as humans. We have power to grow and renew and develop, and we have power this inside as well. So based on this idea, we designed all our intervention methods with this approach. So we try to express, highlights this idea to children when we are working with them. So we help them to realize and reveal this power to change and to fulfill their personal and psychological development.
I remember when we were talking yesterday too, when we were talking about children, we're actually talking about children and youth. So you're dealing with a wide spectrum actually of beneficiaries, which is really fascinating to me. And I still think that the art component of what you're doing to help them articulate actually their emotions is quite fascinating. And what stayed with me yesterday actually was that you were really explaining to children and youth that all emotions, like the universe of all potential possible emotions, are quite normal. Like, so it's okay to be afraid, or it's okay to be nervous, but it's okay to be happy, and it's okay to be joyful. It's okay to feel, 360 degrees worth of emotions, that they're all normal. So normalizing those feelings, validating those feelings was quite fascinating to me when we were speaking yesterday. And I guess that's kind of the gist of both art therapy, is normalization and validation, because it's a way to express emotions that are kind of, you don't have the words for them perhaps. And also the whole child-centric concept in your field of activities is quite fascinating to me. So, but if I remember correctly, your activities started with child protection programs, right? It started in like Balat, where you had this influx of a whole bunch of different people coming from refugee situations, many mixed cultures and diversity. So there was the tension of war, the tension of being disrupted and unrooted. Then there's a tension of fitting in somewhere where, everyone's trying to fit in and nobody has necessarily a particular kind of local identity, or they're trying to create a local identity. So that was really interesting to me when you were describing like all the factors that go into creating such stress for young people. Can we talk a little bit about the Balat Child Protection Program? I mean, it was also interesting when we were talking about how mental health and psychosocial support services coexist with child protection and education services, or they should at least, and we should do better about that, right?
Didem, you're putting the words better than we do.
I studied.
Oh
I was trying to
understand. You studied that so well. Well, yes, Balat is like our laboratory. Balat
right.
is as a, let's say, location. For years and years back, even before the Syrian, let's say, refugee migration, it was a place where all ethnicities or different religions had migrated to this area, Balat. So Balat has its own dynamic. And then on top of that, when Syrians arrived, the whole dynamism of Balat has changed and got worsened. So it was very purposeful for us being in that location. When we arrived to Balat and we, let's say, started with the program first with the mental health and psychosocial, and then we merged it with child protection, which we usually, like in let's say, other centers, they do not. but we said that they should coexist together, like you said yourself. It was a great success because Gizem will tell you cases. We saw that they support one another or they complement one another in such cases. It was for everyone. So a Turkish couple would come, a child of a Syrian would come, an Iraqi would come. So it's very humane. It's for everyone.
Very inclusive, it sounds like too. Yeah. Yes.
It is. And so I think Gizem to explain how child protection works, what are the necessities, what is the demand. The already existing demand was high, and with pandemics, how high it got. Because when you say child protection, it's the household which is getting very stressed, and how mental health is really giving services. So Gizem, I think I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Esra. There's a really fine line between MHPSS and CP side because yes, we consider them as a really different disciplines, but they merge and they dance with each other actually.
Very lovely.
In MHPSS side, for example, in an individual session, with in-depth interviews, with in-depth regular sessions, you can see red flags. That's red flags, which shows us at what point we should address this child or family to CP side. Because, you know, the red flags are some boundaries excluded from MHPSS. For example, we can say sexual abuse or an harassment or a really harsh family violence. So we can report these, you know, we can make some referrals about that kind of cases. Of course, at the same time, the process move on, the sessions move on regularly, the therapist's role goes on. But on the other hand, with a different official procedures, a different child protection steps should be taken on the other hand. But the therapists, at the same time, don't be deeply in that child protection process, but the therapist eyes should be on that side also at the same time.
Checking,
so
maybe oversight or monitoring that it's happening. Sure.
We have to, we as clinical psychologists always follow up, check that process, because yes, some steps are taken on child protection side, but you know, when a case comes to an official point, all family members have a different awareness and response about the issue and the case. So the therapist's perspective, approach differs by the time with the improvements on child protection side. So it's really important to see the red flags, at what point we should take action for CP side, but at the same time, even if we make the right address, we should surely follow up that CP side as therapists.
Now that makes even more sense. I think that words are so important, and you've been very clear with me about what you mean by trauma informed. So trauma informed we're learning about the symptoms of trauma, right? And recognizing them and being able to cope with them. But among those symptoms are also the red flags, which mean that you have to escalate or elevate that response to child protective services or some more advanced form of response. So it's really interesting that it's a whole continuum, actually. Trauma informed itself is a continuum.
Yeah,
so I mentioned as merging and dancing.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
So I mean, the Balat situation is very unique because of all the just the layers, the compounding layers of dynamics that are happening in that community. But again, I think child protection services and psychosocial services around the world, mental health around the world. It's not just Turkey, right? It's all around the world. Everybody's trying to come up with solutions and new programs and methods to cope and improve these types of services. So it's a big deal. And I think that you're setting a lot of precedent. So all of the experience that you're gaining is also quite valuable for future development. But it's what you're doing in Balat is a little bit different from what you're doing in crisis response or disaster response. Could we talk about, for example, just because it's so current, could we talk a little bit about what happened in Muğla with the wildfires? You know, what are the children experiencing? What were the children and youth? Maybe they're still experiencing it, but I'm sure there's a lot of anxiety about the wildfires coming back. Most likely they are going to come back. We know that this is happening with global warming and climate change. So there's the response, and then there's the preparation for what's going to come next.
Yeah, we work with children, adolescents, and the adults as well in Muğla, and their experiences was very similar, because most of them share that they have some sleeping habits, they have alcohol, they have eating eating difficulties, and the adults share that they have increase in their alcohol consumption and smoking habits, and the other adults share that they have increase in their with violent video games, and their experiences was very different from each other. So we try to support them in terms of these are the traumatic symptoms, and traumatic symptoms are the normal reactions to abnormal incidents. So body and mind are reacting these traumatic events different, because these events are not common and usual for body and the mind. So these are very usual and normal, and we keep talking about what are their coping mechanisms to these symptoms. They share their experiences and their habits, and then we talk about if these coping mechanisms are effective for them, because their coping mechanism may have unhealthy. So how these coping mechanisms can be converted into the more effective way. So we talk about that, and they share their experiences and they share their opinions, and there
we go. So because our friends are in Urfa, sometimes their connection is going out. I think there's a snowstorm there. I think Sinem just fell. Gizem, you're still there. Can you
Maybe
finish what Sinem was?
Yes. And I can support what Ayşe Sinem said. In Maya Vakfı, all programs are designed with a response to a need. A need occurs and a response occurred in Maya Vakfı as a program. It appears as a program. So what happened in Muğla actually is that I think Maya Vakfı Foundation's presence in Muğla actually was a climate emergency response again, because it was a need, and we redesigned our structure. What was that structure? We have a model, it's called project lift model. We have a technique. What technique? Expressive art therapy technique. And we revised, we had a new format for that model according to the needs of this disaster needs. It was a climate crisis, you know, it was a climate emergency response. So as we say, yes, there were individual sessions, in-depth sessions there. There are some group therapies, the group activities there, like similar in Balat, because, you know, in a climate emergency field, it's a bit different from the Balat Child Center, because, you know, it's had to be more close to PSS sites, psychosocial support site. But it was a revision of our project LEAF model, expressive art therapy model, tailored to the climate emergency situation, actually.
Yeah, I mean, that whole notion of natural disasters, whether it's an earthquake, a fire, a flood, those type of things, like that whole survival anxiety that we were talking about is fascinating. And I was just thinking, I was remembering where I was during all of these activities, the 1999 earthquake, the recent earthquake in Izmir, the fires. I was there the day before. I was in Marmaris. Like that whole survival anxiety when you're directly affected, and even when you're indirectly affected, there's survival anxiety. So I think it's a much broader field. There's a community of people you can help directly, but then and I think you've also started exploring, maybe because of COVID, but online services as well, right? So in Balat, at least you're doing online programs. So
Yes.
maybe that's an opportunity for you to expand your capacity too online. Will be really quite interesting. So, we talked about art-based therapy programs, expressive art, actually, child-centric programs as key concepts. We talked about the importance of sustainable holistic programs. So this isn't happening like overnight. These are, long-term initiatives. It's not just one session, it's multiple sessions of follow-up. We didn't talk that much about resilience, capacity building, and expertise development, the work that you're doing with other NGOs and government agencies, because you're not just working with the beneficiaries, you're also building capacity with your fellow NGO communities as well. But the reality is you're doing all of this with a staff of 100 people. You're growing almost to 120 soon. You have 25 people on your management team. You have active volunteers. You have a pool of over 400 volunteers. At least a quarter of them are active at any given time. And those volunteers are really diversified too, right? So you're dealing with people who are supporting your marketing and communications, but you're also dealing with translators, and you're also dealing with field workers. So you have this whole spectrum. If we were going to make a call to action now in terms of building your capacity, what would we say to volunteers or potential volunteers? What would we say to sponsors maybe, and even individual donors? Like, how can volunteers, sponsors, and donors really support Maya's work?
Maybe I should take this.
You can start, sure.
As a start, just as a start. I think the work, what a volunteer work, or whether if it's a donor or a sponsor, it is giving. It is giving and supporting. It is being involved in the work. It is believing in us, first of all. It's not staying outside. It is becoming, one of us, and feeling what we're doing and sharing our purpose. So this is the first, I think, mandatory what we're looking for. The second, I think, let me say, pillar that we're looking for is that after becoming one of our purpose sharing person or individual or a group or an institution, is that at least we need sustainability. We need a long-term relationship. We don't want to date for one day. We need a long-term relationship.
Good.
We want people to believe in us. We want people to walk in hand with us. We need their capability. It's not just to give in, just the money. It's just their thought, their goodwill, This is how I think Maya Vakfı started, with compassion, with passion. So we need passionate and compassionate people. So I think this is what we need. We need to be sponsored. We need to be funded, because without that, we cannot scale up, we cannot grow, we cannot reach to more beneficiaries, which actually the need out there is huge. It's getting bigger and bigger every day. So this is how much we can do as alone, as just ourselves.
You're doing wonderful. But we need more. There's a lot more ground to cover.
We need more. We need more. And I think with like TPF believing in us is grateful. We're more than grateful. It's been an example. I think the disaster crisis was a huge example, because it was just the time of response. This is what we're looking for.
Just in time. It was so fast.
It was so fast. It was, we needed the money. Disaster was happening. It was to be responded. We got it and we were there. And the beneficiary got what they needed. we were there for the children, we were there for the women, and great report. The only thing we need now is to be able to reach out for more, and Balat CP program needs to be supported to be
sustained, sure.
Exactly.
Sustained, scaled.
Continue.
And, you know, that's an
Exactly.
opportunity, I think, you know, for sponsors who are also looking for kind of a long-term meaning like 3 years. So if sponsors could sponsor a geography, a program, something specific, maybe an element of what you're doing, like art materials, etc., those type of things, it could be really, really fascinating. Even
Sure.
technology support would be really fascinating. And then, of course, there are the individual donors. So individual donors, of course, are, you know, our saving grace. Like, we work always in the nonprofit world together with individual donors, and we need them to walk the mission with us, really.
Sure. I mean, any kind of from, you know, 1 penny to any kind of amount is an act of giving. Any kind of giving is an act of giving. Heart giving is more than enough. Walking by our side is enough. But I think that you know, sharing, giving it improves the quality of life, right?
For everyone, sure.
For everyone. And this is all I want to say. So let's improve the lives. Let's really educate, improve, transform the lives. Let's be all together.
Well, as we're approaching our time limits, I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing. And again, you're taking a very heavy subject, but really approaching it in such an optimistic and productive way. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I hope that you're able to scale all of your capacity so it becomes nationwide and not just limited to emergencies and to specific zones. As an opportunity to support Maya Vakfı Foundation, please visit their website, mayavakfı.org. But you can also donate from the United States TPF Fund campaign site, donate.tpf.org, campaign Maya. You'll find it there. I would like to thank all of our speakers, Esra, Gizem, Sinem, and all of our listeners for being with us today. This is Turkish Philanthropy Fund, Voices of Partners, signing off with Maya Vakfı Foundation. Thank you all.
Thank you.